Greetings and welcome to the Here We Stand podcast. We're coming to you from Providence Baptist Church here deep in the heart of Central on the corner of Hooper and Lovett Road. I'm joined today by my show's producer, fellow elder, Roger Dale Peters. And we have our special guest today, Pastor Mark LaCour from Grace Bible Fellowship. Our Here We Stand conference is going to be this year again in the fall. Actually, Mark, it's hard to believe this is our fifth conference, our fifth annual conference, started in 2021. It's going to be October the 24th. It's going to be a Friday night. There'll be two messages. And then Saturday, October the 25th, there'll be three messages that day. We're going to be back at Riverside Baptist Church in Watson, pastored by Pastor Larry Hubbard. Our sponsored churches, we have 8 churches from the Louisiana area that come together to sponsor this conference. We're going to be all bringing some desserts for Friday night and some finger foods for Saturday to enjoy a lunch fellowship. It's going to be a great conference this year. Our theme is going to be Our Sovereign God, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But Mark, you and I have been friends for somewhere close to around 25 years as I counted it. Now, I was wondering, do you remember when we first met or how we first met?
I've been straining myself to understand that. I can't really remember that. I mean,
me neither.
I just jumped in the middle and all of a sudden, say, hey, I got a friend here and he's a great friend.
I'll tell you what, I do remember that this time period was around the year 2000, 2001, when Rusty and I first started at Friendship. And of course, you preached my ordination service, but right. It was around that time where we had the Reform resurgence. The internet had been around about 5 or 6 years. And there weren't many of us that were Reformed in our soteriology in the Baton Rouge area. And I just remember Brother Moak telling me, hey, I know this guy, Pastor Mark LaCour. And some kind of way we hooked up and been friends ever since. And it's really been great. And what we're trying to do, as we have been so far with this podcast, is to take the pastors of the sponsored churches of Here We Stand and also those who preach at our conference and do some biographical sketches of their life for the folks that come to our conference to kind of get to know our pastors. So Mark, if you could, I would love to hear just kind of where you started out at, where you were born, and take us through a little bio of Mark LaCour for now.
I'll give you the bullet points if I can of some of my history there. Born in New Roads, Louisiana, and raised in North Baton Rouge, Brookstown area.
Okay, yeah, and right down the road from me.
My parents moved to Sherwood Forest. I think it was in 65. I remember going to St. Thomas More for 5th grade. My sister went to Audubon Elementary, and we were there for St. Thomas More, graduated 8th grade, went to Sherwood Junior. From there, went to Broadmoor High. And in Broadmoor, it was around, I was probably I was a sophomore because I was on the JV football team.
Okay.
And the reason why that stands out is because these are little pivotal, I call them Ebenezers that stand up into, your history. And, I remember we took a trip. There was all the JV football players and some of the varsities. We were invited to go hear a guy. He used to play for Broadmoor, I think, on their championship team in 1966. And he was given a Bible study. Mm-hmm. And he was given a Bible study, I think it was in Stanford Place out there by LSU. And that's when I first heard the gospel. And I couldn't even tell you all the ins and outs.
Well, before you go on, let me ask you. So you were raised Roman Catholic?
Roman Catholic, that's
Were y'all like Mass every Sunday, or was it nominal?
Nah. My parents weren't, devout Catholics. Mm-hmm. They would go on occasion or special days, things of that sort. But they weren't really like pushing you to always do those things. Now, when I went to St. Thomas More, just simply by virtue of the fact that you went there, they had, mass on this and mass on that, high mass.
How many years were you at Catholic school?
Graduated from St. Thomas More in 1968. Because that's as many grades as they had.
So you went up to like 8th grade?
8th grade. Okay, then you would transition over to Catholic High if you wanted to continue with your Catholic education. Mm-hmm. But I didn't want to do that. Parents didn't want to do that. So the next step where we were located back then in districts was Sherwood Junior High.
Right. So, whenever you first heard the gospel, if you're like me, having been raised Roman Catholic, the very concept of grace alone through faith alone was something I never heard of until I made it to Grimble Springs Baptist in Rusty Reed's Sunday school class. Was that kind of how it was for you?
That wasn't.
Okay.
It's kind of weird because I just remember going to that Bible study with all these guys and leaving the study knowing that, wow, I want to know more about this God, this great God that this guy talked about. He was a football player, and I think that's why they had us go listen to this guy. And I couldn't even remember the guy's name, but it was at the home of Earl Carpenter. Now, Earl Carpenter was a pivotal figure in the Campus Crusade for Christ movement on the LSU campus. And he was big with Don Tabb. I think Don Tabb and those guys started the chapel on the campus. Don Tabb was an affiliate with the Billy Graham Crusade. And so that's how I got introduced to Christ. And that's the only reason why I say that. And it's blurry. I got to be honest with you, because I don't even know exactly. Oh yeah, I remember he said this and I believe that, like the statement or whatever. I just knew that from that day on, I wanted to read my Bible. I wanted to study more. I wanted to learn about God. And it was kind of strange because that was during football season in 1970. And by the time the season ended and everything, most of those guys had no interest in the Bible and the scriptures, but I still did, which was weird. And I wasn't around anybody to encourage me, but yet here I was kind of fired up wanting to read more about the Bible kind of thing. And so, make a long story short, coming that spring going into 71, there was a guy who came in to the high school ministry called Gordon Ainsworth. And it's funny because this guy was from Campus Crusade, and he was trying to get to what they have is a high school ministry. Him and another guy named I think his name was Larry Perkins. Larry was dealing with the high school ministry at Lehigh during that time. There was Lehigh over off of Perkins in or Lee Drive, and Gordon was working with Broadmoor. I think maybe Tara. And so anyway, he had gotten in touch with a church, and the church knew some youth, and the youth got in touch with Gordon. And one of the guys that talked to Gordon was a guy named Kent Parsons. Now, Kent was a guy that I played football with at Broadmoor, but he told Gordon about me. I think you need to go talk to this guy. I think this guy's, I don't know if he's a Christian or he's interested. I just know that, he seems to really want to follow the Lord. And I just don't think he's got nowhere to go,
Right.
So he got together with me, and, I remember they go through the four spiritual laws and the little booklet and everything. And, and I remember with that I pretty much told him, I said, no, I'm a Christian. Pretty much I'm not one, because what you're telling me, this is what I believe, And, so from that kind of magical moment, he started a Bible study, had a discipleship group, kind of brought us underneath his wings. And what's really interesting about me telling you about this is that we have a reunion with those guys coming up on June 28th.
Come on. All right.
This guy's a pastor, Gordon, still a pastor up in near Detroit, Michigan. He's flying down, and we're supposed to get together.
That's good stuff.
So it's going to be, we haven't seen him. I haven't seen him since high school. So it's going to be interesting to really see this guy after decades, Yeah. But, and I guess he gets to see the fruit of his labors.
Right.
In that sense, But, so at that point, I became a Christian, was really getting discipleship by him, went through my high school years with him, and he moved on and I wanted to study at Dallas Theological Seminary. I went on into LSU, but I kept coming back to Broadmoor to minister to people. And so in that field of doing that and gathering my own little discipleship group.
And how old were you about that time?
Let's see. I was 18. 17, 18.
Still living at home? Right.
Yeah, still living at home during college. And so we had a Bible study. I met a guy at LSU. He was the best man at my wedding, Steve Birchfield. And he had a Bible study at Lehigh. And he was with the Campus Crusade with the Larry Perkins guy. And so we kind of teamed up, and we kind of became real close friends. And to the point I was best man at his wedding. He was best man at my wedding. He went to a place that Campus Crusade put out. You could either go in the summertime, you could go to something called a beach project, where you go to the beach, like Myrtle Beach or Panama City, and they would teach you how to evangelize on the beach, or you could do something that would be more inland, which I did. And I went to a place called Kings Arrows Ranch in 1975. I was around 20. And
both of you were in LSU, or enrolled in LSU at the time?
Correct. We're both at LSU at the same time. And so we could, we studied together. We even had classes together. I was in a general education curriculum course because I thought I was going to go to seminary. So I took Greek. I took whatever I could that would prepare me for seminary. And anyway, during that time, we just kind of developed more of our Christian walk. We had Bible studies ourselves. And so we had people from our past high schools that were joining our Bible studies and meeting with us. And so as we kind of grew and developed along those lines, we could tell that God was doing something with our group. We didn't know we were going to become a church one day, but in the midst of all of that, there was another serendipitous moment where I met another guy, and he was a good Christian. I was alternating going to church at the chapel on the campus and a community Bible in Jefferson.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that church. That wasn't Brother Baggett at the time.
Brother Baggett at the time,
I'm very familiar with Brother Baggett. I'll have to tell you that story later.
I remember going over there with Brother Baggett and them. And there was a great guy over there. His name was Steve Douglas. And Steve's a great guy. In fact, I think he was one of the first coaches for the Home School Association here in Baton Rouge, or the Baton Rouge Patriots or whatever. Right. But anyway, hanging out with Steve hanging out with Steve Birchfield, the guy with the Bible studies I was having, and then also with Steve Douglas. It was interesting because, and this is why it's important, because where Steve was in his Christian walk, he was really studying things about the spiritual warfare, and about demons and fighting the devil and things of this sort. And so he had gathered a bunch of books that he was reading, and him and another friend of his named Frank Smith. And we would get together and we would talk about these things, and we'd read these different books and learning about, different things concerning the spiritual warfare. Where he had picked up a book, I think by a guy named Rockstad, or Ernest Rockstad from Kansas. And the guy gave a list of books that he recommended for reading. Well, one of the books that he suggested reading was a book called Practical Demonology. I mean, it almost sounds like a Wiccan occultic kind of book. Right. But it was written by a guy named Conrad Merle. And so Steve picked it up, ordered it from Ernest Rockstad. He got it in. He said, man, this book's really good. This guy sounds like he's been through some warfare. And so, we picked it up. We looked at it. And then one day, a few weeks later, Steve calls me and he says, look, I think it was on a Friday. He said, look, me and Frank, we're going to go up and we're going to visit this author, Conrad Merle. Do you want to come? And the reason why that's important is because I said, yeah. And so I went up to Bentley, Louisiana, met Conrad Merle. Conrad gave us all of his books for free. But that started a relationship with us and Conrad really became my mentor, my father in the faith, through that encounter. And so he really took us underneath his wings. He had conferences 3 times a year. And we just
a lot of us feel familiar. The people that go to Here We Stand are familiar with those conferences.
Exactly. We hitched our wagon to his, and he pretty much took us under his wing and sort of discipled us from there. And so a lot of my history from that point on took a big turn in the direction of, and it's from him that because I remember, and this was kind of interesting because I remember back in 75 when I was at Kings Arrow Ranch, one of the requirements that you had to do being there was that you had to work on a message, and you had to bring a message.
And you had never done that before.
And I never really done that before. I mean, I did Bible studies, but I said, I'm going to bring a message. And so I remember everybody was bringing all these little messages, and I don't want to say they're little feel-good messages about how to overcome discouragement, or, how to, trust God for a wart or something like this on your foot. But mine was on free will versus predestination.
Oh, boy.
Because I was, 110% Jack Daniel proof Arminian at that time. Yeah. And but when I got in touch with Conrad had a book called Salvation When. And the title was, and he was trying to address this whole idea is, when is a person saved? Like when? Salvation, when? When were you saved? And if you really couldn't pinpoint a date in your past history when you were saved, well then you're not saved, And so the book, I got that book and latched onto it. And God did a number on my head with that book. And it wasn't because of the logic of the book. It wasn't because somehow he just could, spin a syllogism in an argument to make it mean, wow, I never saw that before. It was how, when we got together with him at that interview, and I saw Steve and Frank, they started debating him on predestination and the sovereignty of God and everything.
Because they're Arminian.
Because they're Arminian as well. Yeah. We were all Arminian, to the core. And so, and I watched him not defend the doctrines of grace, but I watched him defend the grace of the doctrines. And I just saw in his demeanor,
the way he did
and the way he handled it, and the way he responded in love. And what that did, it opened a door for me to be open to hear the other side.
Right.
So I said, I want that book. I want to read that one. And so God did a number, kind of like, it reminds me of C.S. Lewis. You remember the conversion of C.S. Lewis? He got on the train or the subway or whatever, lost, and by the time he got off, he was saved. And I felt the same way. I got in the car in Bentley to go home. By the time I got to Baton Rouge, I was sovereign grace. Because I was reading the book in the back seat, and I was like, oh man. And I remember the guy had the grace he showed, and it's like,
well, it says a lot about how you present the doctrines of grace.
Right. It really shows you how in 2 Timothy 2, he says the Lord's bondservant must not be quarrelsome, but patient, gentle, and he was all of that. And so God used him in that book to really change my way of thinking. Well, I introduced that to Steve Birchfield with the Bible study. Well, he latched onto it. Our Bible study. So we started teaching our Bible study. Then we started going back up there because we were on fire at that point.
Yeah. Then you're seeing it on every page of the Bible.
Oh my gosh. Right. And every Arminian seems to be, in the crosshairs or something, which isn't fair to them, but at
Cage
the same
stage, James White. Yeah.
Exactly right. So, and at that point we were kind of off to the races, got married in 79. Had my firstborn in 82 and, Megan in 84, had Ashley in 90. And all during those times we were going to Bentley, and Conrad was kind of mentoring us and bringing us.
And are y'all still going to church at campus?
No. What had happened during that time, me and Steve, we wasn't so much broke off from the chapel on the campus. It was that we saw the people really wanted to commit to one another, and they wanted a local church.
The Bible study group. Yeah.
The Bible study group. And so, we did that. And in the process of doing that, we, had to come up with a name. We came up with the name Grace Bible Fellowship, not because we were part of the denomination that's Bible. And I found that out the hard way. I had people visiting our church thinking they were visiting a Bible church. What's called a Bible church.
Traditionally.
Right.
And y'all weren't even thinking about it.
We weren't even thinking about it. We just put the names in the title of our church at the things that we really wanted to stress. Grace.
Were y'all meeting Bible in your apartment or?
Well, that's another story. We met everywhere. Okay. We first started meeting at,
and what year was this? This was 79 or?
During the Bible study days before we were in church. This was like, got married in 79. We were meeting in 78. Wow. And 77, we were meeting at the Plantation Broadmoor Apartments. We moved from there to a house church on the corner of Sherwood and Old Hammond. There was a big area. We met there for a long time. We had a good brother that joined us. I practically married everybody in our church because everybody got together. They were single, and everybody started pairing up after a while and started, dating and saying, okay,
So you're officially a Grace Bible Fellowship at this point. You're just meeting in different locations at different times.
Yeah, officially, when you're talking about Secretary of State and all of that, and having doctrines of incorporation and stuff, we had a guy. And I can kind of go back a little bit. I can backtrack. Back in 74, I graduated high school in May of 73. In 74, I was selected with two other people. A girl named Beth Parsons at the time, Ken Parsons' sister, the guy who led me to Gordon. Mm-hmm. She and me and a lawyer named Steve McCollister. Steve McCollister's brother, Rolf McCollister, runs the Business Insider. Yep, right. Exactly. And, but Steve and me and Beth, were sent as emissaries from Baton Rouge to Korea for Explo 74. I don't even remember the Explo things with Billy Graham and Larry Norman. They had in Dallas in 72. Then they had another one in 74 in Seoul, Korea. We went there. I
was in first grade in 74.
About to say, so yeah, he would have remembered. So, I'm a grandpa to you guys. And anyway, we went over there, about 1 million people. It was amazing, but that was 74. And, I bring that all up to date because in 82, Steve McCollister, the lawyer, he kind of got our incorporation papers together, and we officially became Grace Bible Fellowship, technically. And from 82, we had people come in. Steve had moved on. Steve Birchfield had moved on to, he had different plans for ministry that he wanted to pursue. And so I was there with the group, with the church, and there was another guy who was there also, and he had some friends that came in from, South Florida, and his name was, Rusty. Mm-hmm. And he, came in and he became a fellow elder with me. Mm-hmm. And we pastored the church there through the 80s. And, he moved on to South Florida at the end of the 80s, I think into the 90s, if I got my dates correct. And he passed away in the 90s. I mean, he had a heart issue that no one really knew about. He married a girl, one of the girls in our church. And I'm trying to think what else after that, we were pretty much going to Bentley Conrad's conferences 3 times a year on a pretty regular basis. And we just grew the church as a result of that and watched our kids grow up. And my wife homeschooled the kids and the kids started going to Hosanna Christian Assembly. And here we are.
Yeah. So at what point did y'all move to the building? Because whenever I met you, you guys were meeting at South Choctaw, that building on South Choctaw. Yeah.
Let's see. We moved from the house on Old Hammond and Sherwood to the Warwick Apartments on Jefferson, because there was a guy in our church, David Hatcher, his dad owned the Warwick Apartment. So we would get these provisions, for a song and a dance, many times free. And so we moved there and used their facilities for church there. We moved from there and we met in a kinder care off of Old Jefferson. For a long time, they let us use it on Sundays. And so we'd have to, all the things that we had to move all the stuff for the kids and everything. And we would set up there and we moved there and we stayed there. The dates are escaping me, but the experience isn't. I think we moved from there and that's when we moved to the Choctaw location. We were trying to find a place a little bit more central for us all.
Right.
And so the place on Choctaw was the front building section of Manos Electric.
Right.
Now, why that's important is because Manos Electric was the uncle of one of the guys in our church. There's always somebody in the church, there's a connection to something, Right. And so Frank Fasula's uncle was Mr. Mano, and he rented it out to us pretty cheap. And so we stayed there until 2016 when the flood came, got flooded out, and then First Baptist Church of Florida Street. Yeah, Florida Boulevard Baptist Church. They took us in. In fact, they were taking in a couple other churches. And so they gave us a place. We had the old fellowship hall where it's I think a welcoming center now for the churches renew. And we're still there. And it's just a central location for a lot of our folks. Even though we have a good contingency in Central, we have some that's on Bayou Manchac. We have some that's in Maringouin, Louisiana. We have some over in Walker. And so trying to help facilitate their drive and where we're at, we said, we're going to probably need to stay here. And so that's kind of where we've been parked for a while.
Right.
God has us so.
But you were the longest time on South Choctaw for the longest period.
Correct. Yeah. For a long time.
Wow. How many years then would you say you've been pastor of Grace Bible Fellowship?
Gosh.
45 years? Or?
Well, being a leader of a Bible study that transitioned into a church would probably say around 81, 82, 1981, 82.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's been a long time.
Being a pastor. Yeah. Officially in that role. Rusty being a fellow elder with me before he left. And then no one's really kind of come along board. It's not because we don't believe in the plurality of elders.
Right.
It's just that no one's either desired it or met the qualifications of it. So it's like, well, we're still praying for it. And we're still looking at that possibility, even this year, of looking at a few people that might qualify for the office.
Wow. That's great. Yeah. Cause that is so important.
Right.
Well, I'm like you. I can't remember exactly when we met, but you did preach my ordination service at Friendship Baptist Church. And we've been friends for a long time. Yeah. And to talk a little bit about our conference, and really incredible to me that we're already Monday, we'll be in the 6th month of 2025 and how fast time is going by. And we actually started the Here We Stand conference in 2021. So this will be our 5th fall conference. Wow. It doesn't seem real, but you're familiar, and a lot of our folks that are online, that are on Twitter especially, are familiar with the latest sad controversy concerning Josh Bice from G3 Ministries and all of the stuff. And I really don't want to get too much into that. I've read about it. I've understood it. It's a sad thing, but it was interesting. Here We Stand started as when I got back from the G3 conference that year, and I started thinking about,
I remember that.
it'd be great to have a local conference. It costs a lot of money to go to a conference out of town, and somewhere like Atlanta, you got to get a hotel, you got to eat, and all the rest. So we started talking about having that. And now with this controversy that's come up, there's been a lot of discussion online about celebrity pastors and these big giant conferences, and do we need them? I think we still need conferences for sure. And I think that God especially gives certain men in special ways and gives them a lot of really responsibility, I would say, with large platforms and things like that. And we see some do good and some don't. But talk to me a little bit about, what do you think about the importance of having a local conference with like-minded believers like we have, the 5 solas, the doctrines of grace, things that we have in common for local pastors in an area. What do you think about the importance of that, especially with this as of late coming about?
Honestly, I think it's very important, and because I kind of cut my teeth on conferences with Conrad.
Right.
But one of the things I learned in the Conrad conferences that I really appreciate, and I can't really put this mantle on other people and how they put together conferences. And I get it. If you go to a G3 and, you bring in these big names, we'll call them, from across the country. I mean, there's a lot of expense with that. I mean, You've got airfare, you got hotels, you got food and things of this sort. Where I remember Conrad's conference was in the Kisatchie National Forest, right outside of Bentley, the proverbial blinking light.
Right.
But they had built cabins there. Men had come in, free labor, free supplies, and built these cabins. And the way he did his conferences, which always was a head scratcher for me, everything was free. You show up, we'll feed you. My books are free. Tapes are free. We got bunk beds that are free. Everything's free. So in other words, you couldn't say, well, I like to go, but I can't afford it. He took that off the table. There's just a matter of getting up there, And I learned from that and watched through the years where, I remember seeing the line go out the door to feed people. We must have had over close to 200 some people. And there would be, people in the kitchen. They would work the kitchens free. You didn't pay workers. They came the wives would come and they would get in the kitchen, and they would plan for these conferences way in advance. And I remember Conrad saying, the hardest warfare, Mark, for us throughout the year is the week before the conference. I said, why? Because there's a lot of things to do. He goes, not really. It's demonic. They know that people come here and God does work and people get saved. And so I learned something about, the conference. While you got to check boxes and cross T's, you got to commit it to prayer. And I guess George Mueller is kind of one of my heroes, where you watch this guy trust God for those needs. And if there was money that needed to be put out, it was absorbed by the church there. It was absorbed by the top people. It wasn't absorbed by the bottom people. So in other words, you really could tell this is their ministry. And when it's their ministry, they sacrifice to get you there instead of, well, how can I sacrifice to get to that conference? It was kind of the other way around. So, I like conferences because the dynamic is great. You meet Christians from different stripes, and it's always good to fellowship with the different folks than in your church, because they'll give you a different perspective. You hear different preachers than your own. God can use those men to actually, forge maybe a listening ear that you didn't have before, because you hear the same kind of guy on a week in and week out basis. But at the same time, what we try to do, I know, and I've kind of learned this from Conrad, is that when there are conferences, I think of the one up in, there's one in the spring and the fall with Jeff Mercer's church. And it's just by where they have it. And it's out of his hands. The place there that they have it charges. And so we put that before the people. We say, look, but if you want to go to that conference, you just let us know, all expenses paid. No questions asked. That's just how it's going to be. So that I don't want money to be an issue on you not going to the conference, because, they said it was going to cost this and that. You just tell me you want to go. I'll put your name in the hat and we'll take care of the rest. And so for us, and for me, and so not so much to roll it up to the church. I'll roll it up to me if we have to. It's like, I think the leaders in a church, and I've said this before, if you're going to become an elder in the church, you're going to have to take the mantra of the men on the Titanic. Women and children first. If you're going to sacrifice, you're going to have to sacrifice. Don't expect them to sacrifice. They're following you as a leader, and you're going to have to show that leadership in what you sacrifice: time, energy, money, whatever it might take. You've got a vested interest in their souls. You show them how to sacrifice, And so we learned that with conferences. I kind of learned that with I'm not saying other conferences need to do the same thing or follow the same model. I'm just saying it's always a good thing for when people who are in the spotlight and they have, and they're known to be in the spotlight and they got great messages and they got great theology. and I'm not saying they have to be seen this way, but many times when you see behind the scenes and you realize, this guy, he took out of his own savings account to make this conference go. Mm-hmm. Or, this guy had to sell his car to make, these things so that these people could go. I mean, that kind of testimony to me is like, now that guy, I'll go hear what he has to say. He's putting his resources on the line to say, I want you to come hear what I have to say. It not just means something to me, but I'm willing to spend money, not you spend it on me, but I spend it on you for you to come hear me. You don't find that.
Right. It's unusual. So, absolutely.
Exactly. So
that's why we made one of the changes that we made was that, with the food and everything that we have at Here We Stand, we get the sponsored churches to kind of everybody bring dessert, everybody bring a lunch, finger food on the Saturday.
That's right.
And there's no expense, and none of the speakers charge anything, and there's no charge to come to our conference.
That's exactly right.
I hope we get to keep it that way.
Right.
I like it that way. I like the fact it's local. One of the other things, and kind of in line with the whole. Right now, especially, there's a fever pitch within what I'll call the reformed wing of Twitter, with these guys going at one another and they're battling with one another. A lot of times it's over secondary issues and things like that. And one of the things I hope we've been able to model with our churches and our pastors in this conference is the fact that we have these distinctives that we put in place, the solas, the doctrines of grace. We're all believers' baptism. We're all cessationists and the like. But that we have secondary and third level disagreements, maybe theologically, but on those main points, we agree and we come together in spite of maybe those differences. No problem, sit down, debate, and talk about, but modeling the fact that, hey, we are Christians. We believe the gospel. We believe justification by faith alone. We believe the doctrines of grace. And we're coming together to give the people an opportunity to sit under sound expositional preaching. And not only that, one of the biggest things I hear after our conferences is how much the people love the fellowship at the conferences. When we sit down from one another and eat, it's kind of like a reunion with some people. They haven't seen the person since last year at the conference, and different folks that have moved different places. Maybe they used to go to church together. So there's a whole lot of benefit that I see with the Here We Stand conference and the local pastors and things like that.
I agree.
Now, this year's theme is going to be Our Sovereign God. And I wanted to give a little outline. And I think it was actually you. We get together once a year as pastors to kind of plan this conference and plan the messages. And I wish people could be in to hear how all of that develops. I just kind of sit back and let you smart guys go. And I listen. And you came up with some interesting questions as the titles of the message. Because when we talk about the sovereignty of God, one of the big issues that people have, especially if they've never been seen the doctrines of grace or understood it or been exposed to it, is the issue of sovereignty and responsibility. Right. And so this year, Our Sovereign God, you're going to start out with the message, how sovereign is God? That's going to be like the foundation. And then Brother Larry Hubbard's going to come along and give us a message he's from Riverside Baptist. If God is sovereign, why pray? What's the point of us praying if he's already sovereign over everything that happens? And then Rusty Reed is going to come with a message from Reformation Church, pastor at Reformation Church. If God is sovereign, why press on? Why continue on in obedience in the Christian faith if God is controlling everything? And then Brian Gunner from First Livingston is going to address why vote? Why do we go to the polls? If God has already ordained all the leaders, as we see in Romans, and he sets them in there, what's the point of us going to vote? And then Rusty Grant from Grace Covenant is going to come and finish the conference with, if God is sovereign, why tell? Why give the gospel? If he's already elected all those from before the foundation of the world, what is the point of us going out and evangelizing? So I thought that was great to categorize it that way with those questions, because those are questions that people will ask when it comes to the topic of the sovereignty of God. So if you could talk a little bit about your message, kind of setting the table for those messages with how sovereign is God.
Sure. Yeah. And I love this topic because this is the one that got me from an Arminian to a, sovereign grace.
Right.
And it was Conrad's book on Salvation Wind that really did a lot of that. One of the things you have to do when you're the first guy and you're going to set the table for the conference when it comes to the sovereignty of God is what you don't want to do is to go preach everybody else's sermon. Right. You kind of lay on the foundation of what does it mean for God to be sovereign, the extent of the sovereignty of God. One of the big Charlie horses between the ears that people have with God's sovereignty, I'll probably address a little bit because it's not in the other questions, is if God is sovereign over all things, is he sovereign over evil? When it comes to the devil, when it comes to specific evils, whether it's catastrophic, hurricanes or moral evil, God pulls a trigger and kills somebody. And that's a real practical theological issue because as pastors, many times we're put into positions to comfort people when there's evil, when there's trials and there's difficulties. So we'll be looking at things like that, going into the text of the Old Testament, looking at, I like Nebuchadnezzar's answer in Daniel chapter 4 of how he bows to the needs of the sovereign God. And this guy was like potentate over the whole world at the time. And just once again, the different flavors, kind of like the 31 flavors of Baskin-Robbins, 31 flavors of the sovereignty of God that you can see throughout the scriptures. And without that foundation, I'm going to press this. I really don't see how you can live your Christian life.
Right.
So many promises. Romans 8:28. One of the favorite is built on the foundation of the sovereignty of God. And if you don't have it and you're going through a trial and you're trying to hang on to a promise, it's like, man, bro, you've just thrown away the promise because you threw away God's throne and his authority to be able to control these things and bring it to a good end. The lost man doesn't have that personal flavor and touch of God being in control of all things for your good. It's one thing if the devil's in control and it's for your demise, but I got a God, he's my heavenly Father and he's going to work this thing out for my good. How in the world can I despair? I get it. It's hard. It's tough. It's painful. I don't like losing anything or gaining something like cancer or something. But when I know there's a design behind it and it's going to be for my good, it's like, man, but bro, you can take that to the bank. You can really get some mileage in your Christian walk off of it. And I got to tell you, Christians are looking for those kind of testimonies from people who are trusting God in the midst of that kind of affliction. I can give 1,000 messages on dealing with trials and the sovereignty of God, but I'd throw them all away and go listen to Johnny Erickson talk from a wheelchair about how she's trusting the sovereignty of God when she's in the middle of it.
Right. Exactly. You use that phrase, trusting God. It reminds me of, again, I go back to Brother Huey Moak because my mentor and he once a year, he read Jerry Bridges' book, Trusting God, Even When Life Hurts. That book was a game changer. I had already come to the doctrines of grace, but what Bridges does in that book is he gets you to see from the exposition of Scripture how God is purposeful in bringing the trials and man, when I got the hold of that, the purposefulness of trials, it was an absolute game changer for me. Right. And really what this conference is addressing though with these questions is our role in understanding at the same time God's sovereignty and man's responsibility.
Correct.
And now we know with human reasoning, you can't make those two things reconcile. We understand that because we believe that because that's what Scripture teaches. And it's interesting, just so happens that tomorrow I'm preaching, going into John chapter 7. Oh, goodness. And this is when, and John chapter 6 is incredible.
It's incredible.
It's just an incredible chapter. But in 7, this is where Jesus is leaving his Galilean ministry to come down to Judea. He's fixing to be in that transition. But before he transitions, his brothers, his brothers, there's no question about that because it says even some of his brothers were not believing. Why would it say that if if we look at it any other way? But that's enough. We'll put that to the side. But anyway, so Jesus, they're saying to Jesus, hey, the Feast of Booths is coming up. All Jewish men were required to go to the Feast of Booths. Why don't, if you are who you say you are, basically, why don't you come down there and do this publicly? Instead of being out here in meet doing miracles, you need to go to New York, And so you've got this deal where he says, hey, it's not yet my time.
Right.
you go down
Right.
to the feast.
Yeah.
And then later, he
shows
sneaks up. He goes actually through Samaria, so he doesn't go with the caravans because he doesn't want anybody to see him. And so what I get out of that is that how interesting. Who knew more about the sovereignty of God than God in human flesh? And yet in responsibility land, he was being very careful and very precise in what he did in his actions to go along with the flow of responsibility down here.
Right.
And when you can kind of grasp those two things together, it keeps you from, well, God's sovereign, I guess, whatever, you can really turn into error like that. And that's what I really hope our conference will bring out, is to give that balance between sovereignty and responsibility.
I like that.
Well, there's another thing I want to hit, and that's going to be, we have had an interesting development with our men's meeting that we've had over the last year. This men's meeting started out at Reformation Church. It was their regular men's meeting. I live like 2 minutes from Reformation Church. And I went to one of the meetings, and long story short, a lot of you know that watch this podcast or come to our conferences that there was a terrible fire at Reformation Church. They're meeting now at Foster Road Baptist Church. So Matthew Ream, who kind of heads up the men's meeting at Reformation Church, asked if we could start having it at Providence, here at Providence Baptist. And I said, absolutely. And so what's kind of developed over time is we've had in these meetings, these monthly men's meetings, as many as 5 different churches represented in our men's meetings at different times. And then a further development is they had the idea to bring in young men who are interested in either possibly going into the preaching ministry or possibly going into the teaching ministry. And so kind of a place for the young guys to come. And it's not the pressure of Sunday morning with us guys. We get together, we eat. We eat a lot of protein. Sometimes there's only protein there at this event that we have, which is fine with us. We know it's kind of get away from the wives and we go hog wild. But I want to tell you that June 20th is our next men's meeting here at Providence Baptist Church, 10440 Hooper Road. And Tracy West from Reformation Church is going to bring a message from James 4:7, resist the devil. So men, if you're out there, you're looking for a hearty, robust Christian men's meeting, guys who love to talk theology, guys who are living their life for the purpose of the glory of God, June the 20th, Friday night, 6 p.m. here at Providence Baptist Church. We love men for you to come out. We all bring a plate of food. We put it on the table. We eat, we fellowship, and we encourage that brother in their messages. Well, Mark, I just have a 2-part question before we close out here for today. This, I found out, I think a couple weeks or months ago, we were hanging out, and I found out that there is a Hallmark birthday coming up this year. You turned the big 7-0. And that is a marker right there for everybody in life. So I'd like to hear a little bit about your future plans. Are you going to go till you can't go no more? Are you going to retire? What kind of are you thinking right now?
Well, you kind of look up in the Bible, 70. I think that's 70.
Yeah.
And when you hit that, it's kind of a reminder of, you kind of look back and, what have I accomplished, and looking forward. And, you look at in church history, you see some people are packing up their tent when they hit 70. And they got some people, they just starting out. And it's like they have a brand new ministry. They're going to the mission field at 75. Right. It's like, who does that? Right. I don't know. The short answer is I'm just going to keep on going what I'm doing because I love it. And God hadn't, told me to do anything different. And as long as there's a ministry there before me and God, gives me the ability to do those things, I just want to keep on plugging away and do the things that He has called me to do. I do find myself getting called out a little bit more to different churches to preach. And so that's fine. I got a good brother, Mac Tomlinson in Denton. We're kind of known as the M&M boys, Mac and Mark. When they come, we usually go together to different conferences and we'll preach or something along those lines. And I think he wants me to come up to New England with him next year. And so I'm getting out a little bit more,
right,
which is kind of opening up the doors at church for other men to step in, which is the need for the Friday night, trying to get younger men kind of stepping up to these things. One of the things you begin to realize is that I'm not going to be around here forever. If this church is going to continue, someone needs to step into into my shoes, number one, but they're not going to fill my shoes. No one can. And my shoes are kind of small anyway, a tight fit. Trust me, they're not big shoes. But at the same time, you need to begin to start training people that are going to move in that position,
right,
elders.
Right.
And so trying to help our church realize, look, don't try to compare this guy to me. He's not me. But at the same time, if God gives him these gifts, we need to recognize them. So
right.
I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, and just whenever God pulls the plug, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of, I remember, I think it was, John MacArthur said, look, I'm going to go as long as I can until I stop making sense or I die. And,
right.
As soon as I stop making sense, somebody pull me down and set me where I need to be. And I think that's fantastic. Well, with over 40 years of ministry, if you go back to those Bible studies, you're probably talking about close to 50.
To the same church, too.
Yeah.
I didn't have 5 different churches I pastored. It was that church.
This church all the way through all those years, and I think about young guys coming up. If they're, man, America is such a different place. Both you and I together, both our childhood and our teenage years, there were no internet. And America is such a different place now since the internet. For those young guys coming up with those type of pressures, is there any kind of advice that you would give to a young pastor coming up?
Good question. There's a lot that technology can help you in the ministry. There's a lot that it can hinder you, especially with the advent of AI, where you see people abuse this. They write their own sermons. AI does it now. It's like, no, you're going to have to follow the old paths and put in the work and put in the grind. If you're going to be, the pastor, you're going to have to go down the very road and deal with people and their problems. One of the things I would probably tell out of my years of experience, and we talked about this a little bit Wednesday night. I brought up our church. I said, we're called Grace Bible Fellowship. Well, what is Grace Bible Fellowship? I said, when somebody asked me that back in the early 80s, the clientele here was totally different than it is now. I said, I've been the staple all the way through since 82, and 95% of the people are not the same people from 1982.
Right.
And I said, if you don't have a strong stomach to watch people walk out the door and maybe because they don't like you, or maybe for a good reason, I think God's calling me someplace else. Okay. But you got to be able to take that, because it can be an emotional roller coaster if you're not careful. Well, you're going to need to have stable men to be able to do that. As Paul tells Timothy, I'm giving 2 Timothy 2:2, faithful men who can pass these on to other faithful men. And I think a lot of times, especially I have people in our church who are looking to become an elder, I try to spend special time with them in the sense of maybe talk to them individually or maybe get together with them. I don't do that as much as I should, but doing that more. If we have a church controversy, I'll make sure I bring them to the table and they hear it. Maybe I might have any part of it, but you need to see how to deal with this. You need to see how to be patient, how to be not quarrelsome, and you need to kind of learn from this, because watching someone go through that is a whole lot more instructive than just reading a book about it.
Right, right. And, thick skin.
Thick skin. You got to be thick skin. Exactly
ministry, especially bivocational ministry, as you know as well as I do, that's not for sissies.
That's right.
So, that's great advice. I really appreciate that. One of the things that I've always loved about your ministry and your teaching, and I marvel at it, is that Mark is always, no matter what discussion is going on the topic, he can just pull a scripture out from memory and say, oh, this scripture here, da, 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 da. And, I took way too much LSD back in the 80s and 90s to pull anything up. So, people know my story. But you retain information like nobody I've ever met. And so I just love that about your teaching. I'm looking very forward to your message for our conference, our 5th conference that we're going to have. For you out there, if you could go to herewestandbr.com, that is the website for Here We Stand. We have previous messages from other conferences on there. Also, we have a Facebook group, Here We Stand Conference. Just put that in the search bar. Go join our group. As I say all the time to our church and to the folks whenever we gather, the only way that this conference continues to happen is by your attendance at the conference. So if you like this podcast that we did today and you want to get more word out about Here We Stand, like and share it on Facebook and get the word out there. And Mark, I really appreciate being with you today. I always enjoy
Absolutely,
spending
brother.
time with you. Looking
Absolutely.
forward to our
Amen.
conference. And folks, we pray for you. You pray for us. And we look forward to seeing you in October. God
Amen.
bless.
Amen.